Good afternoon, everyone. It's a snowy, beautiful day here in Virginia. We're actually having a real winter still, and I'm enjoying it immensely. But even as we're enjoying the winter weather, we're thinking about spring, aren't we? And we've already done some talk about springtime. But we're going to talk today about seed starting, what kinds of seeds we should be looking for, what's gone on in the seed industry, and all of that good thing. Let me quickly mention again that we have our event coming up at the end of April, April 25th through 27th near Roanoke, Virginia. It's the God's Good Table and Melvin's Farm to Fork event, God-Given Food as Medicine, with Dr. Patty Powers and Stephen Hussey, the chiropractor, Megan Sanctuary, Kat Owens, Miranda Whitehead, myself, and a couple of other people, Kim Furman. But we're really excited about it, and we hope that you will come and join us. So look for that information on our website, www.godsgoodtable.com, and I hope to see you there. All right, so today's guest, I'm excited to bring her on, as I always am. I mean, we don't invite people on whom don't have really a lot to bring to the table, and people who we have learned to know and love. And so to that end, my new friend, Patty Ward, Patty and her husband, Daryl, own So Right Seeds in Missouri. Welcome, Patty. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you for coming on. We're so glad to have you. Last year, about this time, we started talking about gardening and amendments and all kinds of things relating to growing food. This year, we're doing the same thing, only maybe hitting on some other topics. And of course, you can't have a garden if you don't have plants, and you can't have plants if you don't have seeds.
That's
So
right.
this is where you come in. Do you want to give us a little bit of background about you and your company?
Sure. Well, my husband and I started So Right Seeds. Gosh, I think about 8 years ago now. I've lost track of time. We have always been gardeners, even from we just celebrated our 32nd wedding anniversary, and we had a garden the first summer after we got married. And it kind of just is part of, our childhood as well. I grew up on a farm in Idaho, and my parents, we always had some sort of a garden, even on like years when my mom was busy and the garden didn't get a lot of her time or a big focus. We still had carrots. Like we always planted carrots and some flowers.
Yeah.
Um, my husband grew up in a big family. His dad was a high school art teacher, and they grew a garden in the summer as a way to provide for the kids. There was a lot of them, and it was
Yeah.
just part of feeding the family. So when we got married, we always had a garden, even if it was, tomatoes in pots on our patio in an apartment. We always were growing something in the summer. And a number of years, ago, about 18 years ago, my husband actually got a tick and got Lyme disease, which I
Um,
know your husband struggled with. And
yeah.
he was very ill for about 9 years. And during that time, he just got really bad the first couple years, and we just were doing so many things to try and help him get better. When we finally were able to make a lot of progress with his health. He didn't have a job to go back to because he had been that sick. And so he was like, I think I want to start an e-commerce business. And so we were kind of dipping our toes in some different like hardware type products. And then one day he said to me, and I still remember it because I think it was kind of pivotal. He said, I think I want to do seeds. And I was like, that's perfect. You love seeds. He had been hosting seed forums and seed trays with people online for years. and he would, people would send him his seeds, and then he would make these little like paper fold packets, kind of like little origami packets, and then divvy the seeds up. And so that was his way of collecting the seed varieties he really wanted to try. And so when he said, I think I want to do seeds, I just was like, that's absolutely the most perfect thing you could be doing. So we kind of jumped in at that point. We knew we wanted to carry only heirloom seeds. And, that's what we started with, herbs and flowers. And then when we got brave, we added vegetables like a year or two into it, because adding vegetables is like adding, hundreds of seeds. So anyway, that's kind of a little about us. And now we have, oh gosh, probably 5 or 6 gardens on our property. We moved from the suburbs to a property with acreage, so we had lots of room to grow
Okay,
things. So about 5 years ago. So that's been really fun too.
that's neat. I love that backstory too. Is your husband doing fine now in terms of Lyme disease?
He is. He's pretty healthy. There's part of me that, because I do get that question a lot. You
Yeah.
know, if I could go back, I don't know what he would be like 10 years older, having been healthy that whole time. But, we're in our 50s now. I think we're, a little more tired than we were when we were younger, but for the most part, he functions really well, which is a huge blessing. We're so
Good.
grateful.
Yeah, I know how that is. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's quite a difficult thing to deal with. And I think at some point we should probably have a show just talking about that because it affects so many people.
Yeah.
But let's get into talking about the importance of seeds, what different terms mean. There are so many companies that are out there selling seeds, and most of them are owned by big corporations that don't really care about preserving the integrity of heirloom, open-pollinated, and all of that. In fact, many are genetically modified. So let's start in talking about seeds. What do these terms mean and why do they matter? Starting with heirloom.
Yeah, heirloom is a seed that's been around, a variety that's been around for a long time. It's been kind of passed down from generation to generation.
Mhm.
There are several, different ways to define it. Like, some people say it has to be at least, 50 years old. Some say back to, Civil War times. So anyway, it's an older variety that, like our grandparents and great grandparents grew, and they're usually favorites because they produce a great quality, fruit or vegetables. People like them. I want to grow this one again. So that's kind of heirloom, is kind of a big category. And
Yeah,
then open pollinated is really, there's kind of some overlap, because open pollinated is just your flowers out in the garden are, they're just being pollinated by nature.
right.
Open, the same variety, the bees and the bugs and the butterflies are pollinating. They may not be, that heirloom, like the 50 years or older variety, but it's the still of the very natural process of open pollination.
Yeah, that's really interesting and important. Oh, a quick story about heirloom. I was at the National Gallery of Art. This was maybe 10 years ago, and I chose to do a tour of a particular artist's work in the gallery. And they did a lot of still lifes. And there was one that was a basket of beautiful tomatoes, all different colors and
Mhm.
varying ribbings on the fruit. And someone got really excited behind me and said, "Oh, those look like heirloom tomatoes." And I thought, duh. The painting is like 400 years old. Yeah, I think we could call it an heirloom. Anyway, I thought that was funny. But some heirloom varieties are centuries old, even, aren't they?
Mhm.
I don't know that we can track all of them. What is the difference between a hybrid and an heirloom?
So the great thing about heirlooms is that if I grow my, beefsteak tomato, which is an heirloom variety, I can save the seeds and plant them the next year, and I'm gonna get the same beefsteak tomato. It's gonna come true to the parent plant.
Mhm.
Hybrids have been, cross-pollinated, so you can't save them and grow them and get the same plant. Now, you might get something that's similar, or it might have more characteristics from, like, say, the one of the parents, but
Mhm.
it's not it hasn't been through that process of grown over and over and over to where it produces the same as the parent plant.
Right. So it doesn't mean that it's bad. It's not necessarily a negative, but it is just a different thing. I learned something interesting recently when I was at a biological farming conference last month, and I was listening to Ira Waters of Southern Exposure Seeds talk, and actually another gentleman that we're going to interview from Comfort Farms in North Carolina. Um, one of them said that the African slave women, when they came from Africa, they would braid seeds into their hair,
Wow.
not knowing what they were coming into and what was going to happen. They knew that they needed these foods, and so they literally braided them into their hair so they were hidden and they could be carried. And I thought that was really neat. And so some of those seeds have been carried on through the years as
Yeah.
well, not hybridized, but
Mhm.
heirloom. I think that's fascinating. One of my aunts gave me some heirloom seeds to from Norway for hollyhocks. We're
Oh.
Norwegian.
Mhm.
Had some hollyhock seeds that came from Norway, and she shared those with me. So it's really special to have some of those things. And there are some advantages, aren't there, to having open pollinated and heirloom?
Yes. Yes, for sure. I mean, like, if I'm gonna grow something and eat it in my garden, then I want it to be, an heirloom. It's been selected for its great qualities. Like, it could be its taste, it's a high producer. So, that I definitely want that. And I mean, I definitely wouldn't want to plant genetically modified seeds in my garden to, grow to eat the food from. So I know that's a very big topic we can talk about a little bit if you want, but I just feel like if the reason for me to grow a garden is, so we have yummy fresh food to eat, and it might as well be, the best offerings from that, which is
Yeah.
why I like to grow heirlooms and open pollinated.
Yeah. And the problem, and it is a big problem with genetically modified anything, is that you're literally inserting sometimes genes that are not even native to that species or that genre, that family. For instance, injecting tomato plants with genes from codfish so that the tomatoes can withstand cold. Isn't it better to instead just work on producing through cross pollination or intentional pollinating to basically you're hybridizing in
Mhm.
that case to produce a vegetable or a fruit that will grow well in your area. But that is very different than actually inserting genes from
Mhm.
other families, genuses, and species even.
Yeah,
So
and it really happens, like, I last year I went to a regenerative ag conference in Georgia, and I learned so much about this. It was really neat. We met farmers from, like, Arizona, and over time, just through open pollinating and planting the same varieties of wheat. And we're talking about a hot desert in Arizona that doesn't get a lot of water, but
yeah,
over time, those seeds adjust to the climate. So that's why, and you have to be patient. It's not like a 1-year process, but you can allow them to adapt on their own through open pollination, and
yeah.
then they do better in your climate, given a number of years. So I thought that was really exciting.
I think it is too, and that really is at the heart of why heirloom seeds are so important. Because when we have seeds and plants that are adapted to our environment through generations of pollination, of course, will allow for the seeds that are the strongest in your microclimate to grow and thrive, whereas the ones that can't survive will die out. So it's important to have heirloom and open pollinated seeds suited to your area. Um, Arizona is very different than Missouri, is very
Yes.
different than Northern California, is
Mhm.
very different than Alaska. So we do need to be mindful of these things. But for the seeds that you offer, and I'm going to pull up a slide right now of, let's see, which ones are those? That is a vegetable and fruit collection, I believe.
Mhm. It looks like our complete or our homesteader, I would
I think
say.
it's the homesteader one, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So you've got a lot of vegetables in there and a few fruits too. My favorites, cantaloupe and
Mhm.
watermelon. Um, and these are open pollinated, not hybrids. And um, you've selected them for taste and for virility.
Mhm. Yeah, and what we do with our process is we actually get any new varieties that we want to add. We grow them in our like trial gardens the year prior to adding them to actually our website. And so it's kind of a long process, but we will grow them in our test gardens. And if they do really well and we like the taste, then we will add it.
Yeah.
If they don't do well and we're like, you know what, we tried this variety and we feel like we're pretty good gardeners, and so if something doesn't do well, then we will hold off and not add it to our collection. And it also gives us an opportunity um, to do our own germ testing, which is testing for germination. And so that's something that's really, really important to us as a company is, you know, a lot of and I get comments all the time from people like, "I can't believe how well your seeds did." And I'm like, "Well, we don't our seeds aren't old, for one,
Mhm.
and when we get seeds in, most of the time they have been germination tested at the seed warehouse. But when they come in, we also run a second round of germ testing. Like we send it to some of the labs at some of the colleges that do germ testing, and we also have a germ test station, a small one where we can do a couple varieties if we want quick results, to see how they do. So I think that's really exciting.
Yeah,
You
it
know,
is.
yeah. So it's something that we really want. We want to help people be successful, and one of our missions is to provide the highest quality heirloom seeds. And so if we and then we when we do our germ testing, if something doesn't come back, like we tried it and it didn't do well, we pull it and we don't sell it anymore. So I feel like we're trying to have the very highest standards as a seed company that we can.
Mhm. That's important because, again, especially with corporate takeover of some of the smaller companies, I've noticed the quality go down. I don't even bother buying from most of them anymore. Um, but the fact that you test for germination is really important. I do have some seeds that are older that I've had around for a year or two, and I expect that the germination rate will go down significantly. But if some of them start in a flat, I'm fine.
Mhm,
But I buy and I save seed, and I want to talk a little bit about seed saving. So if
mhm,
someone buys seeds from you, either by the packet or by the collection, are they able to save seed for the next year from
mhm.
seed that they've purchased?
Yes. So, now, let me clarify. Do you mean after they've grown it in the garden, or do you mean save the packet if they don't plant all of it
From the garden.
from the
From
garden?
the
Okay.
garden. Yeah.
So yeah, seed saving it's really not difficult. It just takes that extra step. Like if you have some lettuce growing in your garden, you're going to want to leave a head of lettuce or whatever you have out there. You're going to have to let it go to seed and flower. And then
Mhm.
after it flowers, it's going to form like the seed, and then that's where you would save it. So you kind of have to let the plant go through its full cycle
Mhm.
instead of harvesting it and taking it in and eating it. You're going to let it go through its cycle to where it produces the flower and the seed, and then you can just simply save that seed. Tomato seeds, they have kind we do I'll put them in some water and
Mhm.
kind of let that gel coat kind of rinse off, like soak them for, I'm trying to think, 8 hours, and then let them dry out on paper towels.
Mhm.
So that's a little bit extra step for tomato seeds, but really it's just letting your plant the full cycle of growth and produce the seeds, and then you can save the seeds. It's kind of the easy way to think about it.
Yeah, and I don't save a lot of seeds personally. I do save seeds, but it's nice to start out with a good variety, watch how it does, and then when you have plants that are very strong and you enjoy the quality of the plant, of the vegetable or the fruit, then to save that seed and
Save
maybe
your very favorites is
yeah,
like, yeah.
that's what I've done. Actually, I have butternut squash that I got from it might have even been you, I don't remember. I got it a couple of years ago, and I really enjoyed it. So I saved seed from that and some of my watermelons and different things. But I enjoy picking up packets of new varieties and giving them a try. Um, Even in my garden, I a few years ago I planted tomato plants and they were all heirloom tomatoes. And the next spring I had tomato plants everywhere because the chickens had distributed them. And so I've taken to still planting a few very intentionally, but otherwise, I enjoy just harvesting the wild tomatoes. But if I actually wanted a particular thing, I have to plant it. What are some tips that you would have for starting seeds? And I think, yeah, here we go. I have a photo of um, for a lot of people, they find seed starting and transplanting quite difficult.
Yeah.
And I don't think it needs to be, but it can be difficult and cumbersome. So I will point out right now that on your website, I love that you have so much information
Mhm.
to help people succeed. Um, Starting from selecting seeds to planting from beginning to end. So here's one example. What are some tips you might have to help people along with that?
Yeah. Oh, I love this question. So I think of your seeds, each variety. I kind of like to think of them, they're like my children. Each child needs you can't parent them all exactly the same.
Right.
They have different personalities and different needs. And so with your seed varieties, you want to give them the conditions that they need. And
Mm,
they're not all the same. And I think once people understand that, then it opens up their mind to like, okay, and then you can kind of group them in categories. And so like for example, I kind of group our tomatoes and peppers together in a category. We start our tomatoes and peppers in February indoors, and peppers take longer to germinate, although I
mhm.
do have a tip for that.
Ok
And we also plant those in our hoop house so they can go out earlier. But tomatoes and peppers need warm soil, so it's very different than like your lettuce and kale that actually prefers cooler soil and a cooler temperature. So
okay.
now you can see I've got these different seeds. Their needs are not the same. Like if you plant like lettuce does really well where I'm at in the spring and the fall. In the
Mhm,
heat of summer, it really kind of needs some shade or it will just bolt. It'll just be done so fast. So we kind of have 3 garden seasons for us. And so we have our spring cool crops, our summer garden, and then our fall cool crops. And then we have our hoop house, which we works in that. So knowing like there's some things that just like the heat of summer, we're going to plant though, we're going to direct sow those varieties like any melons, any like cucumbers, squash. Those can just be direct sown outside in June, like the first part of June. That's when we're going to direct sow. So they like the summer loving environment. So understanding those needs, I think, is really important. And I have to tell you this: when I am a former elementary teacher,
Yes.
one year we planted bean seeds in my classroom, and I gave all the kids very specific instructions. Only push your seed down 1 inch. It's like at this much. So all the kids, followed, except for this one cute boy named Eli. He pushed his way down to the bottom of the tub. And the kids all saw him and told me, and we just kind of, oh, well, we'll see what happens. All the kids, beans germinated and came up, and we waited and waited. And here, like 3 weeks later, Eli's bean seed finally came up. It was funny to see that, like, it didn't have the ideal environment. So it was really working to, sprout. And so knowing like some seeds actually they have a planting depth, and also some actually need some sun to germinate. So you really just sprinkle them on the top and just kind of lightly push them into the soil. So knowing that, and I will say most seed companies are pretty good about like giving information on the back of their packets.
Yeah, that's a lot of information. That's great.
Yeah, we've tried to we have worked really hard to make our packets have all like the days to germination, soil temperature, sun requirements, whether it's full sun or partial sun,
Yeah.
planting depth, and then plant spacing. And then we have some growing instructions on the bottom. So definitely if you're
Okay.
buying seeds, look for, if you follow this, you have a pretty good chance of being successful.
Yeah, I would say that's very good information. I have a couple of packets from one company that I don't buy from very often, but there's very little information at all. And so I just have to look it up if I have any questions. So that makes it easy. Now, you talk about direct sowing. You seed start in February, March for warm weather crops so that you get a head start because they take a longer growing. There's a
Mhm.
longer growing season, so you have to start them indoors first. You want
Yeah,
to
and I mean, there's kind of several reasons. Like, so we actually, I'll just back up. In January, we start onions from seed, and a
Mm,
lot of people are intimidated by onions.
yes.
I promise you, you can do it. It is not hard. So we start our onions in January, and that's because they just need a long time. And then like our onions are probably like this tall right now. They're in the grow station. We'll let them grow. At some point when they get kind of long, we'll give them a haircut. We'll trim them off, and and that will help them kind of get a little bit stockier, kind of
Okay.
force some of that energy into the root.
Okay.
And
Which is
then
the bulb that we eat.
yeah,
So that.
yeah, and then we'll take those, and then when we pull those up, and when it's time to transplant them outside, we will take them directly from the grow station. They've already probably had one haircut. We might trim them off to, 4 or 5 inches, trim the roots off a little bit, and directly plant them outside. So they're not allowed to dry out. They're not, it's so much better than having them shipped to you, and then there's a chance that they dried out. You're going straight from the grow station to the garden, and they'll do amazing. So I
That
love
is I
about
did plant, I've only planted onions from starts. And last week I planted shallots and garlic late because I wasn't here in the fall to plant it. So I don't expect for my garlic bulbs to get as big. But I wondered too about giving them a haircut, which I've done to
Mhm.
send the nutrients into the base so that that grows larger. So I'm glad you mentioned that because I think that's helpful. I also I took some onion that I really liked and, I sliced the top off and it was sprouting anyway. So I put that in the soil and it's growing.
Mhm.
I don't know what I'll get out of it, but hopefully I'll have a whole onion and I can enjoy it. Um, so you've got your seeds started, you're keeping them moist. And some seeds, as you mentioned, do better in sunnier and some can tolerate some shade. And I'm sure you probably have some that actually like shade.
Yeah, I mean, really I would say most varieties, you know, if it's gonna produce some kind of fruit or vegetable, or a flower,
Yeah,
this is not like a concrete rule, but most of them like full sun.
yeah,
Some of them need longer amounts of sun than others. If there's something that doesn't tolerate, like when we get really hot in the summer, like July and August are hot here. Is it the same for you in Virginia?
not quite as hot as Missouri.
Okay. Yeah, so things that like the cool crops, they definitely do better in, like, part shade, like, anything that's like lettuce, the kales, the broccoli, the
Yeah,
cauliflower, those they're fine in the sun, but when it gets really hot here in the summer, it's nice if they're in a part of the garden that gets a tiny bit of shade in those summer months. So
yeah.
that's a fun tip.
Can you even plant some of those things with other vegetables that you're starting that will provide some shade?
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
That's a
try
great
that.
technique, yeah, to,
Okay.
kind of companion plant and they help each other out, so
Yeah.
there's a million ways to do it, and it's so fun, and some of my favorite gardens and I love the raised beds because you can plant things kinda closer together and, have several things going on, and you can come back and plant something else after, one plant is, established or you're
Yeah.
about to harvest, you can just keep planting, so
Yeah,
I
I
love
think that's
raised beds to grow that way, it's really fun.
I love this picture from your website, which is demonstrating companion planting. And you do have some things, maybe I can't tell quite what it is. What's um, something growing kind of in the shade of the cabbage?
Yeah, that looks like a lettuce variety, like you've got cabbage and then some leeks and then like a squash leaf and then lettuce. It's got a lot of good stuff.
That is so beautiful. I would like to have that hanging on my wall.
Yeah, it's a pretty one.
It is really pretty, but it does demonstrate quite nicely that you can plant companion planting. It has a benefit, many benefits actually, I think, and I
Yeah.
would like you to expand on that. But um, you've got the nasturtium peeking out in the background, and you have something that looks like a melon off to the
Mhm.
right. Um, I have experimented for years with companion planting. And when I say experiment, that means that I've failed at times or I've learned. So it's not a failure if you learn. But there are plants that grow well together. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about that, why and what plants might go together. But I also want to point out that just as this image is beautiful, when you companion plant, it's so attractive.
Mhm.
It's nicer than just straight rows of everything being the same, and that's fine to do that, but the companion planting has such great benefit, including that it's really
Mhm.
pretty.
It is, it's so artistic and beautiful, and, like, if you think about it, like, the what happens in nature the most?
Yes.
Does a row of just carrots happen in nature, or does something like this happen
Yeah.
in nature where you've got the seeds are being dropped and scattered by the birds and they grow? And so I feel like, whenever we're as close to what would naturally happen, then that's an ideal situation. And last year, we did some really fun things in our garden, which I'm so excited about. We planted a row of like big Cracker Jack marigold is kind of that tall, it's a tall marigold. And
Mhm.
we planted a row of that on our south border because it's a great companion plant and it also deters pests. So
Mhm.
we wanted to keep like just there's something about the smell, I guess, of the Cracker Jack marigold that some critters don't like. And so we planted that as a border. And then on our north bed, we have lavender started. So last year was the first year that it was transplanted out in the garden. So this next year it'll be even bigger and more beautiful. But lavender is also one of those, has a scent, and a lot of herbs that have like, that smell. There's things that just don't like it. Like, so it's kind of a good, pest deterrent, but also, the herbs with the flowers, they bring in the pollinators, which you want.
Yes.
So anything it's always good to have things that are flowering in mixed in your garden for the pollinators because you want that. And
Yeah.
there's some things that don't. There's so many ways to companion plant. Like there, if you go to Google or Pinterest, you'll find a million, and I'm not even kidding. But I would recommend you go to our website because we have a bunch of blog articles um, on all the gardening topics. Like we have a gardener and a writer on our team. She's
Oh,
just amazing at both, and she's a researcher and she's a writer, and she writes our blog articles. And I think we're up to like 350 different blog articles. So you can
wow.
just search a topic like companion planting or marigolds in the garden. And then you can see the blog articles that we have on that particular kind of question. So it's
Yeah.
a great resource. And it's good to look up to like things that don't do well next to each other. There are some things that don't do well, and there are things that do really well, like tomatoes and basil do nicely next to each other, onions. So there are things that we do in the hoop house on our rows that are nice to put together. And then another thing we did last year, which was fun, we actually did alyssum, sweet alyssum. It's that's kind of small border flower. We did that at the base of our peppers in the hoop house. So the peppers would get, tall, but then we had alyssum growing along the bottom. And that really just keeps, the weeds from growing.
Yeah, and it holds moisture in the soil because the soil isn't bare.
Yep.
Yeah,
So
so
that
that
was a really fun thing we did too last year. We're kind of adding new like techniques every year. It's a fun experiment in the garden, but probably if someone was getting started, I would say just plant a raised bed. If you have a raised bed, start at that scale and companion plant. That would be a fun way to get started.
and there's I'm sure you're aware of this, the German hugelkultur, um, which utilizes branches and twigs and logs even and creates you lay them out, has to be hardwood, not pines. You
Mhm.
lay them out in people used to just do it in rows and borders and things like that, and then cover it with soil and then plant, and it was always done with companion planting, not single varieties. But
Mhm.
there you get a raised bed environment with minimal effort. And I've done the same in livestock water tanks. That's my backyard garden.
Uh-huh.
And in my front, where on our deck, instead of having a deck rail, we have planter boxes. It's my
Mhm.
husband welded a whole set. And so I used branches, twigs, and leaves first, and that retains moisture and slowly releases the moisture and nutrients throughout the year. So there's benefit there. And I also like that with that style, you don't have to come up with as much soil to fill
Mhm.
a raised bed because you've got
Yeah.
branches and logs. Um,
Yeah, and we did that in our raised beds. We put a lot of wood in the bottom. For
yeah.
one, we're adding a lot of compost and good soil, and we it it's expensive to fill your entire raised bed with compost. Obviously, you know, like we get compost by the dump truck loads and it's still, you know, so it's nice to you fill out that bottom with some bulkier material that will over time will decompose and just to
Yeah.
be more affordable.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And of course, the raised beds are easier to maintain. You can plant a lot in there. I excuse me, I always did basically square foot gardening.
Mhm.
So like that, you can do the companion planting and plant intensively, but as long as you maintain your soil quality by adding compost every year and all of that, you can grow a lot of food and with less input because you're not weeding as much and watering as much.
Yeah,
So,
I I am a big fan of our raised beds. I
yeah,
love it. They're so easy to work in, and you kind of think about, like, you've taken the raised bed and you've added this amazing soil and compost, and
yeah,
it's kind of a little bit protected by all the other things that would be at the ground level. It seems like there's less, like, bugs that you don't want in the garden. It
yeah,
just seems like you don't get as many weeds, you don't get as many bugs that you don't want. It just feels like it's a little bit more protected being raised, and I
yeah,
just find that they're easier to I mean, it's kind of, you know, you have to invest in it up front or the work up front to have it, but then once you have it, you know, it's like my
yeah.
favorite.
It is mine too. And I grew up gardening, maintaining 3 gardens, 3 large gardens with my father as a child, and it was all rose.
Mhm.
And I
That's the way
enjoyed
we did it, you know, that's the way my parents grew our garden as well.
Yeah, and most
Yeah.
people still do, but it's nice to be able to think outside the box and come up with something that's definitely far easier to maintain and produces a great amount of food. So I definitely recommend that. I want to ask you about compost. How often do you compost? What do you use for composting? And any tips that you would have for our fellow gardeners out there?
Yeah. Oh, I love this question. Well, we add compost every spring to our garden beds. The top, you know, couple inches, we work it into the soil that's already there. So that is really helpful. And I mean, you know, we do it every year, which that probably sounds like a lot, but it just works for us.
I think it works for everybody. It's just a matter of
It's a
acquiring.
matter of doing it, yes. And
Yeah.
then but one of the things that a lot of people don't know about, which is really, really almost, I think, just as good, is I like to say, don't leave your soil naked over the winter. You want to add, we one of our favorites is leaves. You know, the leaves that are on the lawn. You know, sweep them up. We sweep them up with the lawn sweeper, and then we add those to the beds. Grass clippings are great, leaves because they actually protect your soil biome. So
Mhm.
it just and then you're adding organic matter that's decomposing, which is just adding so many good nutrients to your garden. So
Yeah.
even if you I mean, I'm sure that early on, before we started our business, that we always covered our garden with leaves. Matter of fact, my husband reminded me. I had forgot they had done this, but years ago, my husband and our son, our youngest, they needed more leaves, and
Mhm.
so he found that when he would just like drive around the neighborhood and knock on people's doors, and they'll have their bags of leaves out there to be picked up, he found that people thought it was kind of weird if he asked if he could have their leaves. So he thought, well, we might as well just, you know, so they started a father son leaf business. And then so they would tell people, we can come get the leaves off your lawn, like we'll come mow them up and take them and, you know, for a minimal price. And then when, you
Yeah.
know, they said, yeah, we can do it for $35. They're like, okay. It was funny. He was like, it was like people thought I was weird and didn't trust me. But then when we had a business and we gave them a price, they did trust us.
Mhm.
So that was how we that was what we did. They did for several years to get enough leaves for our gardens. Like,
Yeah.
and so just, being creative, but just whatever, like, don't leave your, yeah, just don't leave your soil naked over the winter. Whatever you can add to it. And I know, like, I have a sister-in-law who lives in the South, and it's the pine needles that are really, like, they're kind of like their mulch there. So just adding whatever you have in your area to your garden is really helpful. And then we do the compost as well.
Yeah.
And I would try, like, we have had good experiences with some compost places, and we've had bad experiences. So, and we use enough compost that, I mean, we couldn't produce our own. I have probably five compost bins, which I add to.
Hmm.
And then we have two big, like, just yard plant recycling, but we still can't produce our enough. So if you try compost and it doesn't feel like it's matured all the way, or if you find it has like trash in it, like, which we
Yeah.
have found, then I would switch. Don't use that company again. And we found the city next, kind of close to where we live, they actually have a recycling center where the compost is reasonable. You have to pick it up in your own vehicle, but we found that the quality is good. So just
Yeah.
don't be afraid to try a different one if the first one doesn't work out.
Yeah, and we composted for years with tree mulch. So I would call the tree trimming companies and
Mhm.
say, "Hey, I want tree mulch." Not just I've talked about this before on
Yeah.
this program, so I'm not going to go into it in depth, but that is an excellent compost and it holds water in the soil. And then I also utilize my chickens. Now, if I had an operation like yours, this would not be enough. But I know that people who do large scale operations, they do the tree mulch, they go the tree mulch route. I use my chickens and straw with food scraps and, sunflower seeds and that kind of thing. And I toss it out. They scratch it up and they leave their manure behind and it decomposes rather quickly. And I'm actually now each year digging up about 6 inches once or twice a year that I can use to top off my gardens. So for people who have chickens, that
Mhm.
might be a good means of acquiring compost, but
Yeah.
not on a large scale. It won't
Yeah.
work on a large scale. I guess it could if you had enough chickens.
Yeah.
That's a lot of work. But your point about not leaving the soil bare is super important. And to that end, I also would love to talk about cover crops.
Mhm.
So you have quite a few collections of seeds and varieties of seeds. And amongst those, let me see if I can find that picture. You do also have cover crops.
We
Oh,
do.
that's microgreens. So let me, there
There's
we
Yeah,
go.
the cover crops are just, I mean, it's similar to adding the leaves. The cover crops is, I would say, is probably like your gold standard for um, enriching your garden soil. So the cover crops, they add, many of these will add nitrogen to your soil, which is really good. It comes from that organic matter breaking down. Like the daikon driller radish, that actually is really good for soil that's like clay and hard. It actually kind of, you know, drills a hole down in your soil and it helps aerate that. And when, I don't know if you're not familiar with the daikon driller, it's the funniest radish because it's like I've pulled them out and they're this long, but they do a good job of breaking up that really tough soil. So we plant like a variety of cover crops. We'll mix them and, create kind of a mixture of things that they're adding to the garden. So you can plant cover crops in the fall and let them, they'll kind of get established and then they'll overwinter. And then in the spring, when it's warm again, they'll just take off and grow. And then
Mm,
like around, like for us, maybe end of April, or maybe middle of April, we'll actually crimp them, or you can mow them and just let them decompose.
yeah.
Work that into the soil. Some techniques I've seen people use is they'll crimp them and just let them, kind of dry up and die. And then they will just separate them and plant their plants, so that cover crop is actually kind of providing a mulch in a way around
Yeah.
their plants to prevent, it helps prevent, weeds from growing up. But this is a great way to add nutrient to your soil. It prevents your garden, it prevents erosion, and during the wintertime when it rains and your soil runs off. And so
Yeah.
it keeps the soil moist, it just keeps it intact. And so there's so many benefits. Like, this could be a week-long class on cover
Yeah.
crops. These are so
Yeah.
good. Yeah.
And it's not to be overlooked. It's super important. Um, and it used to be that you'd harvest your vegetables into the fall, and then the plants would die off and add nutrients back to the soil. We tend to not do that as much anymore. And sometimes the soil needs something that isn't there. So planting a cover crop appropriately can provide the nutrients that the soil needs in order to improve the soil. Um, so that's just super important. And I'm glad that you focus on that as well. And people can learn more about that also on your website.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, when I drive through the countryside and I see the farmland and I see people's gardens and they're just laying bare, it makes me sad because you're losing so much by not protecting the soil, improving the soil, even creating more soil. Um, so we've got cover crops and composting that help with the soil improvement and management. I meant to ask you also quickly about composting. I think it's such a marvelous way to achieve nutrients, but I also think it's really cool that I used to worry about composting only things that were clean. For instance, um, Carmen or Connie mentioned organic mushroom compost. And I used to just get mushroom compost, and conventional mushroom production uses a lot of chemicals, fungicides in particular. But it's cool to know that you can still take that, the mushroom compost that it was grown in, and allow it to compost further. And composting actually neutralizes most of the chemicals.
Awesome. Yeah.
So, yeah, composting is a good thing. Composting neutralizes most things that are harmful otherwise, but not PFAS, not the forever chemicals. So we do have to be careful about that. But around here, we have people using chicken manure. And I used to say, oh, but it's coming from a conventional farm. They have a lot of toxicity in the feed. But no, it's composted, so it should be safe. Um, so chicken, mushroom, tree mulch, um, horse manure too. Well composted horse manure. I used to worry about the wormers in particular that are
Mhm.
toxic, neutralized in composting. So composting is a wonderful thing. Cover cropping is a wonderful thing. Um, And humanure. Thank you, my friend, whom I have not seen in so long. And I'll bet you know all about humanure. My friend Lisa mentions humanure. Um, and feel free to chime in with some more information about that if you'd like. Have you ever used composted humanure?
We have not.
People tend to be so afraid of it, but it's just like everything else.
Yeah.
It when you compost it, it neutralizes things that can be harmful,
Mhm.
including bacteria from human poop. But it's the same with if it's chicken poo or horse poo or
Mhm.
cow or whatever. Compost it and you get the nutrients without the toxicity. And we don't have to worry about the bacteria because in composting, maybe you can talk a little bit about, and if you'd like, about the microbiology of compost. Have
Oh, yeah. I'm certainly not an expert in composting, although I love, for me, it's just about not throwing things in the garbage that have
you
to be sorted through at the landfill. Like, it's
Mhm.
about every like scrap when I'm making dinner, like all of the produce scraps, all the garden scraps, just going back out into the garden.
Yeah.
And that's and you know, I did kind of a year or two ago, my husband got me this big green composter for my birthday. I know it was really exciting, but
I
I
think it would
kind of
be exciting.
yeah, I kind of we had some littler ones and we needed a big one, and so just adding a variety. The thing that I learned in kind of that deep dive was just make sure you're adding a variety of things. Like it needs some browns and some greens. And by the browns, like the cardboard or the brown paper bag, or like those, if you buy eggs and they have the egg carton, those brown things.
Yeah.
Just it's good to add a variety of things to your compost. So anyway, that was something that I learned that was really exciting. It kind of helps it as it's breaking down, which probably helps, I'm assuming, with the microbiome.
Yeah, and things are supposed to be broken down on their own. They're not supposed to go to the landfill, and they're not supposed to go in the trash. Of course, as I've already mentioned, I give all of my scraps to the chickens, and I say that the chickens recycle them.
Mhm.
Some of what I give them breaks down in the composting process as they're stirring it all up and going for the seeds and the tidbits that they want to eat. And they're adding their manure. So there's this intense microbiology going on that's very beneficial. But then they also give me eggs. So
Mm,
it's like the ultimate recycling for me.
it
So,
is.
yeah. Um, what are some other things once we get past composting and starting seeds, composting, and then companion planting and going through the year? Let's well, here's one of the photos from your website that I think is worth talking about. We mentioned containers, livestock watering tanks, raised beds, but here are some examples that you have of companion planting and different types of planting. And I can see that you have a healthy layer of it looks like tree mulch in the middle.
Yeah, yeah, we do. We actually, I when you started mentioning tree mulch, I was like, "Oh, yeah." We have been really lucky. There's a tree company not very far from us, and I can not every time. I wish it was every time, but I will call them and say, "Hey, can you have them dump a truckload off on the way
Yeah.
home?" And most of the time they will, although I think they're onto us because the last fall when I called, they didn't come and dump it off. So I'm like, they were just because they would actually take their, these mulched up trees, they would have to pay to dump them at the landfill, which I'm
Oh,
like, I will take them for free. So we were doing that. So what we do, we use a lot of that in our like in where we have the row garden. That middle picture is the flower farm, and
yeah.
it just helps keep the weeds. Just keeps it under control. It keeps the moisture in. So I love doing that. If you have a resource, check out tree companies if you have, because that has been amazing for us. I hope they will continue. I don't know. And then on the picture on the right, that's just, my container, small pots on my deck. I
Yeah.
love to have herbs close to my kitchen. I mean, the garden is live on 13 acres, and so the garden is a little bit behind my house, and so I don't always want while I'm making dinner, I don't always wanna run all the way out to the garden because I don't have my shoes on, but I just wanna be able to always grab the herbs that I need, and they're right there handy.
Yeah.
So, I love to have a container garden with just some of my favorites. And then on the left, you can see that, These are carrots, and they're in a raised bed, and you can't really tell, but that edge is a raised bed. And then for the walkways in the main garden, we actually, um, we put in some, like, landscaping. I don't know what they're called, like edge. It's like just a metal edge.
Yeah,
We do
yeah,
have some gravel walkways just in a few parts of the garden so that we don't have to worry about weeding and stuff as much. And then you can see, like, behind there, we have, like, some onions and, a trellis for other things in the garden.
yeah.
Um,
That
so
is all 3 of those photos are beautiful. You can see that everything is growing just beautifully, and I, like you, enjoy having my culinary and medicinal herbs
Mhm,
close by. So I do have a lot of containers in which I have also incorporated on a small scale the hugelkultur. So I start with
mhm,
twigs and leaves and things, and then the soil and the compost that I top it off with every year. But my containers that my husband built on our deck are filled with lots of herbs, and I can pick even into the winter. Everything is pretty much dead right now, but in another month it will pop up again. And if somebody has a sniffle, I can go out and snip, snip, and make some herb tea, or snip whatever I want for my dinner.
mhm.
So,
Yeah.
and
I
you
I love having, the perennial too, like the perennial herbs and the medicinals, and,
Mhm.
they're so nice because once you have them established, like they come back every year, and it's so amazing. And this is not in the picture, but just on the other side of the carrots, we have our medicinal border. That's on the west border of our main garden,
Okay.
and it's just full of all of the medicinal herbs that are perennials.
Yeah.
So, I know there's so much with gardening, and I know it can be overwhelming to people. So, one thing that I like if you're new to gardening or you're kind of new, I say grow some of the things that you really love to eat, that your family will eat.
Yeah.
Pick, like, 5 to 10 things that you wanna have, start there, and kinda learn, you know, what those seed varieties need so you can, parent those seeds the way that they need to be parented, right? And
Yeah.
then kinda just add a little bit every year. Like, if you jump in, like, I don't, and this is opposite of, like, I'm not like, my personality doesn't take my own advice. I like to jump in and, like, "No, if I'm gonna garden, I'm gonna grow 100 varieties, and I'm gonna order all of them, and we're gonna, like, plow up the whole field," it's overwhelming to do it that way. So I would say, work on your, fundamentalist soil, which we've talked a lot about. Work on your soil, work on your watering system.
Yeah.
If you can automate it in any way, it will save you so much. I love hand watering. I actually find it therapeutic. But there are times you just get busy. So even if you have a hose and a sprinkler on a timer, like,
Yeah.
even if you start with that, which is pretty basic, I would say focus on your soil, focus on your water system, of course, start with high quality seeds, and then, you can always learn and do more. But I hate to see people overwhelmed with gardening and then just quit and never do it again because they kind of jumped off the deep end and into the swimming pool.
Yeah. I think I'm a lot like you in that I jump into just about everything with both feet. But for me, when it's something important to me, it actually works usually. But then 5 other things go by the wayside. So, but automating the watering is definitely something to consider. We've always talked about it, but never done it. And consequently, when I'm busy and traveling a lot from May through October, things die. Um,
Yeah, I call my husband. I'm probably on the similar schedule with you, with, traveling to different conferences and events. And there's a lot of times I'm calling my husband. There's a few things that we're still hand watering, and I'm like, I need you to go check and water, because it's like I
Yeah,
have this nervous feeling when I'm gone about something not being watered. So
yeah,
anyway, my advice is
too.
just, to set up and like we actually get a lot of rain in May and June. Like sometimes it will rain every day and I'm like, I need it to dry out so I can transplant in the garden. But then once July and August hit, we'll go weeks without any rain. It's just super hot.
Yeah.
And so like during that time, having the watering system is been really crucial for us. Um, so that's kind of something I think is important. And then, yeah, a lot of people ask me like what to start their seeds in.
Yes.
And I feel like it's worth mentioning. We talk about seed starting mix and potting soil. They're not the same thing. So I recommend a seed starting mix is a light, fluffy texture. It just is a great medium for your seeds to germinate. It doesn't really have a lot of or any really nutrition in it. It's just a light, fluffy mix.
It's a
Um,
little like in nature, seeds start at more closer to the surface of the soil that and they've been covered over by leaves and such that is light and fluffy. It's breaking
mhm.
down. It's not hard. It's not difficult for the shoot to push through because it's very light and airy. So that's the main difference then between a seed starter and a growing mix.
Yeah, like a potting soil is great for when you're transplanting. So like when we start our tomato seeds in our inserts, they will be I like to use an organic seed starting mix. It's light and fluffy. The tomatoes germinate and then we don't fertilize them or give them any extra nutrients until they have at least like their two leaves on them. They're the first two leaves are called the cotyledons, and then the second two are the true leaves. And so
Mhm.
you think the seed has all the energy it needs to germinate and to throw up those cotyledons. And then after that, it needs nutrients from the soil. And a seed starting mix, you're like, okay, it doesn't have a lot of soil. So we'll add like a micro amount in our water system in our so we're just giving it a little tiny miniature dose when we water in the grow station. And
Okay.
then when we transplant them. Tomatoes and peppers do well with transplanting. Not all plants are that way, but they actually do well when the roots are disturbed a bit. So we'll put them in like say a solo cup size, and they're in the grow station. They're getting pretty big. But at that point, we can use potting soil because the seed doesn't have to push up, through the soil. And some
Yeah,
potting soils, you'll have like little chunks of wood, and you
notice
don't
that,
want it
yes.
to fight that hard to come up. So I
Yeah.
just kind of like to mention I like seed starting mix for planting the seeds and getting them to germinate and then potting up, a potting mix or a grow mix or, making your own is always really fun too. So there's just a
Yeah.
difference in them.
And I like to use paper egg cartons to
Mhm.
start my seeds. That way I don't even the more tender rooted plants, I don't have to tap them out. I can just break the carton apart and plant each individual section, the size of an egg, into the garden. So that is really helpful. And my friend Lisa mentions that sometimes we can find in neighborhoods, we can find that they collect leaves and you can request to come and pick up the leaves every fall. And then you can top your garden off with that, or you can compost it. And I've seen people also take the leaves and shred them and then toss them out or compost them. So that is a great idea. Thank you for that. Unfortunately, my neighborhood does not have that. And I'm also at the point living on a mountain that um, when I see a tree trimming service up here, I literally will run out. I did this recently and I fell and just about broke my wrist, but
Oh, no.
I'll run out and ask them to drop the mulch off. but now I think some of them are catching on,
Mm,
and
I
I
think
think
so.
maybe I have to offer $20 to drop, and it's worth it. If you can drop me off a whole load of tree mulch, and then it's worth $20.
Mhm.
So the same
Yeah.
with going around then and gathering leaves from neighborhoods on cleanup days. I have seen that. I haven't seen it around here, but that's a great idea too. So I think we've covered everything all the way up to the point of harvesting. And you mentioned early on in our conversation about how to let the plants grow all the way through their growth cycle to the point that they go to seed. So maybe as we close out, if you want to talk for just a minute or two about how to actually save seed from the plants that you most appreciate and want to continue.
Yeah, you just wanna let it, flower, and then almost like it'll get kinda dry, and
Yeah.
then that's a good time to go and, like, I'll just cut them off, like, if the flowering part is up here and it's all dried out, I'll just cut it off a little lower, and then I'll take it in the house. There's several techniques, like, you can put it in a paper bag and kinda wait for them to fall off, and you can kinda shake the paper bag, and then you can get the seeds out, or
Mhm.
you can just, kinda crumble it in the palm of your hand and find the seeds and then save those. So you kinda wanna think like this plant is all done, it's flowered, it's dried up, let's harvest the seed. And if you don't know what this, I mean, and it's funny, seeds are all so different. They all look completely different. Like
Yeah.
if you've ever seen like a cosmos seed, it looks like a long little skinny stick. And calendula is like one of my favorite ugly seeds. I think it looks like a dried up worm. It has this like little pearl shape. So you just have to find out, like, make sure you know what the seed looks like, because it might be hard to tell if you're doing it for the first time on a plant that you've never seen what the seed looks like. You could look it up and make sure you're saving the right part of the plant, because when it's all dry and brown and crumbly, it could be a little bit tricky. That would be my tip for that. Uh,
Yeah, sometimes with the tiniest seeds, I don't worry as much about them being clean and just purely seed because I'm going to scatter them over a surface anyway and then thin them out. Um, so we've come full circle to harvesting the seeds. We have one question about seeds, whether they need light for germination or not. Are there some that need light that maybe we purchase grow lights, or generally do we need to have
you
sunlight
know,
or light?
there are some that actually need, so like seeds that you bury in the soil, even if it's like a fourth of an inch or a half of an inch, they will actually germinate without the light. So, and
Right.
we don't do this, and I don't think people realize this, but like when you grow microgreens, you actually put them in blackout. And once the seed, germinates and sprouts and gets like an inch to an inch and a half tall, that's actually when you put it in the light. But
Okay.
there are some varieties of seed that actually you sprinkle on the top, like I said earlier, that need the light to germinate. And I'm thinking off the top of my head, I'm thinking chamomile is one of those. I'm just kind of remembering that, but and so those ones you actually don't want to bury all the way. You just lightly push them in so they have seed to soil contact, but there's a little bit of light getting through. And
Yep.
sometimes I'll just sprinkle a little tiny layer of, seed starting mix so they're not really completely covered, but just pushing them in is a good technique.
Okay. Or tapping them down lightly with the palm of your hand.
Mhm.
Yeah, and microgreens are a unique class of seed in and of themselves that pretty much anybody can grow because you can grow them inside. You're harvesting them while they're still small, and you're getting a tremendous amount of nutrition. And sometime soon, we'll interview our friend Mallory from Barefoot Microgreens, and
Mhm.
we'll talk about that. But for anyone who's intimidated by gardening or the thought of seed starting, but wants to improve their health and nutrition, microgreens is a good place to start and very easy. So I can't read the entire message here. Snapdragons, tobacco, and mulberries. Are those companions? I can't read. Okay, now I can see, especially if I put my glasses on. Lisa's planning to plant them, and they say they need light. She's just not sure if it's natural or artificial light. Do you know if it makes a difference generally?
No, I wouldn't say it does. Like, if you're getting ready to start, I don't know where you live, but if you're going to start them right now, I'm assuming they're going to go in a grow station.
Yeah,
That's because I'm in the middle of winter still.
and she
You know,
is as well. Yeah,
yeah,
she's
so
not.
light is light. Now, light from the sun is really powerful. It's like 90,000 lumens per square yard. It's an amazing amount of light, and we often don't really realize that because it's so far away. So
Yeah,
when you have a grow station, you're just creating a little, the light, you're not there's no way it's as powerful as the sun, but you're giving it the light. It's really close, it's direct, and it'll do well. I will say, let me give one more tip.
yeah. Please.
Maybe two more. The biggest mistake with seed starting that I see like all the time is that their seedlings are long and leggy. And that's because the light is too far away. So
Yeah.
when we actually start our seedlings, I have my lights like 4 inches above. They're
Ah,
like right on top of the plants. And then what we do is we use the extra starting trays as like stands upside down. So it's here holding up this tray. As the seedlings grow, I'll pull this out so there's room. But if your light is like clear up here, your seedlings are reaching and stretching to get to the light. And your long, leggy seedlings they're not going to be as healthy. And
yeah.
they sometimes recover okay, like if you transplant them outside, but it sets them back. And you don't want to wait 3 more weeks for your fresh garden tomato if you don't have to. So
Right.
that is like the biggest thing I see. I feel like I tell people, make sure your lights are right above your seedlings. And then it's nice if you can either adjust your light up as they grow or, like we do, we just,
Adjust the plant.
yeah, that
Yeah.
is, something I would, and I love doing the LED lights, the full spectrum, because you're getting a better quality, artificial light than just say like when we first started, we just had some fluorescent light bulbs in our grow station and it worked fine, but the LED lights they work so much better.
That's interesting. I was wondering about that because I generally want to avoid LED lights, but you're saying that for plants, for growing, they're fine.
I feel like they just do so well. They're getting more light.
Yeah, better than a fluorescent.
Mhm.
I avoid them generally because of a couple of reasons, but mainly they're alternating. They're flickering on and off so fast that our eyes don't recognize it, but our brain does.
Mm.
And it can be very irritating to the brain. But apparently not to plants. So that's okay.
Yeah, I have no well, I guess how would we know, right? I mean, and when like I don't it's not like we don't stand in the grow station all day long, right? We check on them, we water, and then we leave it. And so, yeah.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. So, well, I think we're going to wrap it up unless somebody else has another question. Do you have one last thing you'd like to share before we say goodbye?
Oh, sure. Well, thanks for joining us, everyone. I'm so excited for you and your gardens.
Yeah.
There's one really cool tool on our website that you may want to check out. It's called the Planting Planner. And we have worked on this for over a year and it is up and it's running on our website. But basically, you can go in and enter your zip code and then click like submit and it'll give you a spring tab and a fall tab and it will list all the different vegetable varieties, flower varieties, and you can look at the date based on where you live of your indoor start date or your direct sow outdoor start
Okay.
date and plant spacing. It just would make it really easy to, like, say, type in your, when should I start my snapdragons, in, if I'm going to start them indoors or outdoors. We've kind of put it all in one place, and I just think it's a free tool that we offer, and I want people to use it because it's there for you.
Good. That's really neat. You've worked so hard to put together not just a wonderful inventory of very special, useful, and wonderful seeds, but also a website that is just chock full of information to help us along. So for that, I thank you. And I'm going to be ordering especially some medicinal herb seeds from you this year, as well as a few other things. And so I'm really happy. I'm happy to have had you on. I'm glad to have um, made a friendship with you through a couple of events that we've both been to, Doug and Stacy especially. So for our listeners, we're going to close now. And I want to just say thank you so much for joining us. We are going to be interviewing my friend Christian Elliott next week about detoxification, the importance of and the how-tos of detoxifying the body. And then we're going to come back and talk more about gardening. We will be interviewing my friend Michael Kilpatrick, whom we've mentioned a couple of times. They are starting to send out willow and elderberry and berry starts, and they also have a lot of other plants and a lot of good information as well. And we have some other guests coming on that we're really excited about. So we'll keep you posted. But again, we're just thank you. And I'm grateful for the time with Patty and all of the information that she shared. Please check out our website again, www.godsgoodtable. Check out our event and all of the other cool things we have up our sleeve coming out soon. And please like, subscribe, and share, all that jazz, but it is really important to us. So we thank you very much for everything, and we look forward to coming back and seeing you again next week.